So far, the only space agencies of 5 countries have managed to land on the moon: the United States, the former Soviet Union, China, India, and Japan. Only one private company, Intuitive Machines, has succeeded, while several high-profile missions have failed due to various technical issues. This is a stark reminder that even more than half a century after the Apollo era, safely landing on our satellite remains a challenging and dangerous feat. Recently, only China has had full success with the complicated Chang'e 6 mission, which managed to land on the surface, collect rock samples, take off, and head back to Earth. That's the story for robotic probes. The more concerning issue involves NASA and private industries facing a series of delays with the Artemis project, which was supposed to return humans to the moon by this year. So what's going on? Has human ingenuity declined since the Apollo years? How is it that we can't even go to the moon anymore after doing it 6 times in 3 years with surprising ease? And where exactly is the Artemis project at? Let's dive in. The Artemis program initially aimed to bring humans back into lunar orbit by 2024 with Artemis 2 and land on our natural satellite surface by 2025 with Artemis 3. However, it's now clear that even in the best-case scenario, these objectives will be achieved with a 3-year delay. It must be the fact that we have been waiting for more than 50 years for a serious lunar exploration policy. But this constant postponement is starting to wear our patience thin with the entire space exploration system. What's happening? Do you feel like shouting at NASA's intercom? Are you going back to the moon or not? To explain better, let's take a brief look at what has happened over the past few years and how we've reached the current stalemate, okay? In 2017, the Artemis program was announced. NASA not only declared its intent to set foot on the moon again after decades of dormancy, but also to do so in a revolutionary way. No more planting flags and taking brief strolls. This time, it's about building a lunar base, a space station in lunar orbit, the Gateway, and using it all as a springboard for Mars. A thrilling plan, right? Imagine astronauts living on the moon, rovers searching for icy water, reusable rockets ferrying back and forth like space buses. A sci-fi vision with a budget approved by Congress. And here, my friends, is where the first crack in the wall appears. Because when NASA says we're going back to the moon, it's not talking about organizing a weekend camping trip. It's something colossal. It's like comparing the Apollo program to a low-budget black and white film and now wanting to remake it in 3D with a billion-dollar budget. Get it? The first act of this space renaissance was Artemis 1, the uncrewed mission launched in December 2022. Remember it? It was right in the middle of the pandemic. The Space Launch System, or SLS, the most powerful rocket ever built, lifted the Orion capsule toward the moon on a 25-day flight. Everything seemed to go well. The photos of Earth fading into darkness were goosebumps-worthy. Orion returned home safe and sound, and NASA got a standing ovation. "We did it," they shouted. "The future is now." But beneath the surface, as we would later discover, were already the seeds of trouble that were about to sprout. For instance, during re-entry, Orion's heat shield eroded more than expected. No danger for a potential crew, sure, but it was still a warning bell that sent engineers back to the drawing boards. A minor issue? Not at all. Imagine having to redesign a car bumper while the car is already in production. You can understand how the whole operation would become absurdly slow and complicated. And then there's the cost. Each SLS launch burns over $4 billion, a mind-boggling figure. $4 billion per launch. It's like burning the GDP of a small country like Barbados or Sierra Leone every time you light the rocket. And that's just the appetizer. NASA has an annual budget of about $25 billion, but the US Congress doesn't always give NASA what it asks for. In 2023, for instance, it received $1.3 billion less than requested. And from this budget, Artemis consumes a huge slice. The result? Redesigned priorities, slowed projects, and pent-up frustration. In short, the SLS rocket is so costly that even space enthusiasts struggle to defend it. Each launch is a financial black hole. So then one might ask, why not just use cheaper rockets like SpaceX's? Well, here's where the story gets really interesting. The SLS isn't just a rocket, it's a monument to politics. Its components are built in dozens of American states, ensuring jobs and political support. It's a vicious cycle. The more expensive it gets, the harder it is to abandon, simply because so many vested interests revolve around it. And so while SpaceX is revolutionizing the market with reusable rockets, NASA remains chained hand and foot to a fragile, exorbitantly expensive behemoth. And then, of course, there was COVID. Let's not forget that. What for us was a long period of masks and curfews turned into a logistical nightmare for the space industry. Factories closed, key components got stuck in ports, and engineers found themselves working from home with screaming kids in the background. Artemis lost months just waiting for a microchip made in Malaysia or a valve shipped from Florida. Even now, supply chains still bear the scars of that terrible period. Designing Artemis during COVID was practically like building a house of cards during an earthquake. Hey guys, just a moment before we continue. Be sure to join the Insane Curiosity channel. Click on the bell, you'll help us to make products of even higher quality. The facts are that the launch of Artemis 1, originally scheduled for 2020 from the 39B complex at Kennedy Space Center, has been postponed several times, finally taking off on November 4th, 2022, when the uncrewed mission finally launched, designed to circumnavigate the moon for the first time in exactly half a century since Apollo 17's historic mission. One might have thought, okay, there were setbacks, COVID happened, but still the mission succeeded, and now things will finally hit the right stride. Not by a long shot. So much so that for Artemis 2, we're witnessing the very same string of delays and indecisions. That mission, with 4 astronauts scheduled to fly around the moon, was supposed to launch in 2023. Instead, it's been dragged on until December 2024, when NASA Chief Bill Nelson finally put his face on the issue to announce that the launch would be further postponed, due to months of engineering investigations into problems with the life support system and the heat shield, no later than April 2026. Aside from the ambiguity of that "no later than" promise, should we really believe Nelson's words? Even if we do, a 2.5-year delay is a long time, and the contrast with the rigorously timed launch schedule of the entire Apollo program becomes even more stark. Back then, departures were off by at most a couple of days. Of course, NASA is doing what it can, and surely they don't take pleasure in disappointing millions of people's expectations. The reasons for these accumulated delays, which do not excuse the agency from huge organizational errors, are all very real. They start with the SLS rocket, which is undoubtedly a technological monster, but also a marvel of complexity. A space Frankenstein, immediately powerful yet vulnerable, assembled with parts recycled from the Space Shuttle, the RS-25 engines, and other abandoned projects. This machine is so intricate, almost with a Soviet flavor, if you will, that it has almost never passed its successive tests without a hitch over the past decade. There are constant leaks of liquid hydrogen, valves that inexplicably jam, sensors that go haywire, seals that fail. Poor engineers. It's really tough to meet deadlines in such a toxic situation. So assuming nothing else goes wrong, after the dress rehearsal for Artemis 2, there will be the grand finale with Artemis 3, a 30-day mission with 2 astronauts returning to the moon after 55 years. And that will be the climax of our colossal 3D remake of the Apollo saga we were talking about earlier. But without wanting to dampen your enthusiasm, with Artemis 3 the story risks becoming even more complicated. Due to the delays accumulated by previous missions, its launch has been scheduled for the summer of 2027. But even here, everything hinges on the successful development of the lunar lander, which has been entrusted to none other than SpaceX, led by Elon Musk, who can't stop thinking about Mars for a second. Do you see a conflict of interest here? Elon Musk's Starship is a 120-meter or 394-foot tall monster, an icon of technological audacity. It's reusable, with costs much lower than NASA's SLS, and it can also lift 100-ton payloads. However, it still needs to prove it's completely reliable. In 2023 and 2024, several prototypes exploded, flipped over, or danced in ways no one had predicted. Every failure, they say, is a step forward, but time is running out for Artemis 3. Starship must not only reach lunar orbit, but also refuel in flight, a maneuver never attempted before on this scale. Dock with Orion for astronaut transfer, land on the moon without crashing, and then return the astronauts to lunar orbit. And all this without a dress rehearsal. So NASA is trembling and growing increasingly insecure. If SpaceX fails, Artemis 3 is off, and there are no ready Plan Bs. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin is developing an alternative lander, but it won't be ready before 2030. Then there are companies like Dynetics, which have proposed alternative landers but lack sufficient funding. NASA has put almost all its eggs in SpaceX's basket, a calculated risk that could turn into a spectacular collapse. Meanwhile, China announces plans for a crewed lunar landing by 2030, and the political pressure mounts. They don't say it openly, but the competition is there. NASA denies racing against Beijing, but when Bill Nelson warns that China could claim lunar territories, you understand the stakes are high. Artemis isn't just about science. It's about geopolitics, prestige, and resource control, like lunar water, and this adds pressure. It doesn't end there. There's also the issue of the spacesuits that astronauts will need to wear to walk on the moon. And here we enter the realm of tragic comic. The suits are being developed by Axiom Space, a private company. But it's not like sewing an elegant dress. A suit must withstand extreme temperatures, radiation, micrometeorites, and allow fluid movements. And indeed, there are a lot of problems. The astronauts testing them complain about an endless series of discomforts and malfunctions. The result? New tests, new revisions, new delays. And the delivery keeps getting pushed further and further back, not by days, but by months. Without these ultra-tech suits, the Artemis 3 astronauts won't be able to leave the lander and walk on the moon. If you ask if the old Apollo suits would still be useful, certainly. But the imperative of a remake, we all know, is to achieve perfection at all costs. And the pursuit of perfection, as they say in the US with the motto, more money, more problems, isn't always a guarantee of success. Looking ahead beyond Artemis 3, there's also the issue of the Gateway, the Lunar Orbiting Space Station, which remains another controversial piece of the puzzle. The Gateway is meant to be a lunar space station orbiting the moon, serving as a staging post for future missions. Some see it as nothing more than an unnecessary burden, while others consider it an essential platform for deep space exploration. Europe, Japan, and Canada are chipping in with modules, yet delays continue to pile up. For instance, the European Habitation Module, IHAB, originally scheduled for 2025, has now slipped to 2028. Without the Gateway, Artemis 3 might still go ahead, but the subsequent missions, those intended to establish a permanent lunar presence, would be effectively paralyzed. And it's exactly this state of knowing and not knowing, lacking a clear direction, that's affecting NASA's operations. Back in the Apollo era, when resources and possibilities were far more limited, choices were few but unified by everyone's common will. Today, however, there's a constant stream of proposed mission models, making it hard to settle on just one. Now, put everything together. Fragile rockets, non-existent landers, spacesuits running behind schedule, dwindling funds, and NASA's rightly obsessive focus on safety, something that was taken much less seriously back in the Apollo days. It really makes you wonder, then why not just quit? The answer is because it's all worth it. Artemis isn't merely a return to the moon. It's a step towards Mars, a sort of insurance policy for the survival of the species. It's proof that despite wars, pandemics, and divisions, humanity can still unite for a grand purpose. And then there's the magic, the prospect of having the first woman set foot on the moon, the first person of color to venture there, flags that represent not just a nation but a consortium of countries. It's a legacy for future generations, a story that begins with, once upon a time, there was a program full of setbacks that never gave up. But it's also the most daring human adventure of the 21st century. Amid rocket explosions, endless meetings, and engineers guzzling coffee by the river, there's an entire generation writing the future. Maybe we won't land in 2027. Maybe it'll be 2028 or even 2030. But when it happens, it will be an epic leap. As with every great story, there have been adversaries, time, gravity, and our own unyielding knack for complicating life. The delays are inevitable, yet every day in some laboratory, someone is solving a problem, overcoming an obstacle. Artemis is like a raging river. It might twist and slow down, but it will ultimately reach the sea. And when it does, it will be a historic moment. Not one that's perfect or flawless, but one that is profoundly human, just like us.